And welcome again to the X Chambers. Today, we're continuing our conversation with an attorney, one person who doesn't just work on her own, but actually works at one of the largest law firms here in Dallas, Texas. You know, our goal is to find out what is going on with businesses, not just small businesses, large businesses, but the people who are working one-on-one with citizens here in Texas and finding out how is it? How was it, before 4 or 5 years ago? How was it during COVID? And then now that we're in 2026, how is it here? And so I'm actually here with Morgan. If you could give us a little intro of who you are, a little bit about your firm, and kind of introduce yourself.
Yes, so my name's Morgan McNab. I work at the Texas defense firm. There's about 11 different attorneys there. We all do criminal defense, but kind of focus a little bit different areas of criminal defense. So we have people that, work in appellates, with go to the Supreme Court. We have some that focus on federal cases. I myself work just more at the state level with, misdemeanors, felonies, and even down to traffic tickets. So.
Well, the last time I think we spoke with Aubrey, and she had mentioned really the challenges that people have, not just with not understanding how the court system works, but even with, she said a lot of it has changed and things have kind of sped up, and she's actually seeing more convictions, maybe less crime actually happening, but more convictions, which is fascinating because if you do get in trouble, you have a higher chance of actually of having to have some kind of remedy for it instead of just being able to say, oh, I'm going to get off, or maybe it gets dismissed. No, things are becoming more intense. So what would you tell individuals who, let's say, did get arrested or in trouble? What's the first thing you tell them to do when they interact with that officer?
Well, when you're interacting with the police officer, I guess I can give you a hypothetical, like, a DWI, for instance. Let's say you're pulled over and they're interacting with you. You need to be respectful, need to identify yourself. But, I wouldn't be, in DWI terms, making admissions to anything. You do have a right to refuse doing the sobriety field test if they ask you to. Same if they want to get a specimen of your breath or blood, you have a right to refuse. That way it makes the officer, fill out an affidavit applying for a search warrant, and they're supposed to put in all those facts that they have. So, the less information you kind of give them, a little bit of the better. So, yeah.
I see. And so a lot of the times it seems that, especially in Texas, the DWIs are pretty popular. But now what's happening is it's not just the DWI. What is in your car? What do you have with you? A lot of people are going to the vape stores and that's one of the things we talked with Aubrey about. Yeah. And they're buying this hemp that they're getting. And then maybe they do drink a little bit, they're driving, but they forgot it's in their car. All of a sudden things change. And then if they have a firearm in the car, everything changes. And so how are you seeing people navigating, or at least the legal system navigating, this idea of hemp now that it's even in the conversations now?
Yes, it's a great question. And honestly, on a weekly basis, I see it changing, more so when we're talking counties. So I have had a lot of clients hire lately that have been stopped and pulled over, and then, they're arrested, or they find vape pens in the car. And while that used to, or in counties like Collin, gets you at a felony level, I am starting to see some agencies give citations as if the equivalent of drug paraphernalia, like if you had a pipe in your car or a grinder or something. And I think that's because they understand that, Texas has really created, I've heard one judge call it like a spaghetti bowl, like a mess of if this truly is THC, because of course, it's legal. They're selling it in the store, but when they go and they test it, then we're heating it up, and then it's what's coming back kind of, I would say, kind of a false reading almost of what it is. So.
And what's interesting about that is it just seems that at least the police, which is more of the enforcement side of the law, they're putting, I feel like, more responsibility on the courts now. I feel like they're almost more liberal with, well, let's just arrest and let the court figure it out. Let's let the courts figure it out. And it seems that it's almost like that's becoming more popular. And then now it's becoming like, in this situation, now you have to know, how do you test it? Is the lab that I'm using the right lab? Is this even what they're saying it is? I think that's such an interesting concept, but people have no idea. They just think, hey, you know what? I know this isn't illegal. I bought this down here. There's no way I'm going to get in trouble for this. But for the fact that if they don't have defense, or if they don't have the right representation, you could end up getting in trouble with a felony. And some of these felonies are years in prison. So what do you tell people who do get caught with those kind of things and think, you know what, I think I'll be okay. I'll just show up on my own. Is this something to take lightly?
Definitely not something to take lightly. Again, I think one thing that can be frustrating for people when I do a consult with them is that they have a friend that's been in trouble that had one kind of outcome. But, your case is going to be different, not only at every county, but, even in the different courts in said county, because you have different prosecutors on the case. But, it's very easy to want to think you can go and represent yourself, but a prosecutor, the most they're going to do is just tell you what the offer is. They can't give you any kind of legal advice. So you could be, not a citizen of the United States and be told by a prosecutor, for instance, on a felony, I will offer you 2 years deferred adjudication. And they'll try to pitch it to you like this is a non-conviction, 2 years is the minimum supervision period. And you could potentially even get off early if you're successful and compliant. But, if you're not a citizen, a deferred adjudication is still a conviction in the eyes of immigration and still a judgment that can be used against you. I think they try to trick people by saying at the end it's dismissed, but as great as that sounds, it's still always going to be there. You at most maybe would be eligible for a non-disclosure 5 years down the road. So it follows you.
The classics are DWIs, maybe some form of possession, things like that. What about people who are guilty, and maybe they did something where, for example, shoplifting or even domestic violence? How do you personally, as an attorney, approach that, knowing that, hey, you know what, the evidence is clear, it's very, very possible that this person did it? How do you approach that whilst keeping, morals?
Right. So, when I'm looking at cases, I start it from beginning to end. I see what legal issues there may be, if any. Let's take domestic violence cases, for instance. Yeah. Those are very common. It's very common that the complaining witness doesn't want my client prosecuted. And so it's having an honest conversation with the client, because I'm starting to see now that the counties are still prosecuting even if the complaining witness isn't on board. But talking with the client about this is what a trial would look like, what evidence could be admitted or not admitted, depending on, your partner's availability if they're not available. But another thing I talk about with them is working on mitigation, because when you go into trial, I think as an attorney, it's important to be prepared for the whole aspect of trial, not just guilt, innocence, but punishment phase of trial. So you get to punishment phase if your client's convicted, and that's putting on evidence and testimony why this person shouldn't be facing that full range of punishment. Put them on probation, or if, again, kind of earlier on the road, kind of game plan with them, having them do anger management or go to counseling, because sometimes there's a lot more to the dynamic of the relationship. So let's get into couples counseling and kind of work it out.
What's interesting about that is that it seems like it's really about, hey, how do you navigate the legal system? And even whether you're guilty, not guilty, whatever, that's I think the beautiful part about the country is you have the opportunity to be first seen as innocent, and then you have to be proven guilty, right? And so you come in and almost really navigate their ability to, hey, this is all the tools that you have in your ability. Even if you are guilty or if you're not, there's ways to navigate this to where you end up in a better situation. And a lot of that does include counseling. It does include anger management, improving yourself so that you can then show to the court that, hey, look, we're trying to make efforts here.
Exactly. Yeah.
And let me ask you this. When it comes to like justice, when it comes to these things, what does justice mean to you?
I mean, justice to me is what is kind of good in whole when you look at the case, not just for obviously the client, but if there's a complaining witness, but what is also going to be a learning lesson overall for everyone. I don't feel like justice for someone that's a first-time offender is facing that full range of punishment. Even if it's a super egregious crime, I think we need to look a little bit more into it. I think, Aubrey's right. We are seeing a lot more convictions, but I think society doesn't realize if you send someone to prison or even county jail, the limited resources they have in there compared to if they were in the outside world and could be supervised and, getting the treatments that they really need.
Do you think the courts handle non-violent crimes well compared to how they've handled violent crimes? Do you think there's ways that they can maybe do it better or do it differently?
Well, I kind of hard to answer that question. I see them being way more hard on violent crimes lately, even our juries too with it. It's been pretty interesting to see compared to at least when I first started practicing around COVID. So I find them to be a little bit more understanding and lenient with your nonviolent crimes, but that kind of comes with a caveat. It depends what your background looks like. If you're coming in here and we've been in trouble multiple times before and then we pick up a theft charge, they're going to look at it a little bit differently compared to if this is your first time getting the theft charge.
This was with the Carmelo Anthony case that was actually here. That was probably the court that you're in most of the time. How did the case affect the energy in the court, or even maybe how the judges were approaching things? Did it have an influence on anything? It seemed to have a national influence. Do you feel like it had an influence inside the courtroom as well?
So I think the way I've really seen the influence is how us defense attorneys are kind of advising our clients. Now, in terms of how the courthouse operated, they really kind of shut down. It was really interesting seeing how closed off it was. There were some courts still having minor appearances here and there. I think more than anything, that's just going to show judges that, hey, we can keep this kind of closed doors if the media is really having a strong presence. But I think this case more specifically with certain clients I have has kind of terrified them. It makes it really real of what trial looks like and what, worst case scenario could be, even when you are someone that's just really a young kid, just like him. So
let me ask you, let's put you into Carmelo Anthony's defense attorney's position. Mm-hmm. How did you see the case? How did you see the outcome? Where do you think it should have landed, or do you think they made the right decision?
Well, personally, and this is probably just because I'm a little bit biased, I was surprised that they didn't at least entertain sudden passion to kind of shorten that sentence range, the 2 to 20. It's really hard on the outside to sit here and say this defense attorney didn't do this or should have done this, because when you're in trial yourself, there is a lot of moving parts. Things happen that you don't anticipate. And I think there was even a period of time where news was reporting they've been on break for 2.5 hours in there. And when you're in those defense attorney's shoes, a lot of that could be arguments that are being held in the courtroom. Maybe they want to get into a certain expert witness and the state is trying to prevent that from happening. A lot of what they call 702, 705 hearings, trying to say that this isn't, an expert in the case. Or maybe they're, trying to talk with Carmelo about whether or not to testify, which is a really hard conversation to have with clients. I think a lot of times in trials I've seen, oddly enough, most of the time when they do testify, it ends up being a conviction, strangely enough. And I wish I knew how or why. Sometimes I think clients present themselves super well, but yeah. So
that's interesting. So, and to kind of go over strategy on that, the reason you would or wouldn't have them testify, if you would have them testify, is because you think that the story would compel the jury to say, hey, you know what, maybe we should lean a little bit more towards them. But the reason you wouldn't want them to testify is because of the cross-examination, right? And
exactly.
The questions end up being pretty tough on them.
Exactly.
Have you? So that's interesting. You're saying, so you have seen that end up going the wrong way. Mm-hmm. Do you have any guess why?
With this specific one,
or in general? In general, yeah.
Yeah. So really, my evidence professor in law school had a very good, I guess, way of telling us what it's like picking a jury. A jury really is, he says, think about going to Walmart and just finding 12 random people. And that kind of what it is. I've picked panels on one day that have actually been busted. I shouldn't say picked. We busted a panel, meaning too many people struck themselves for cause, and you come back the next day and you're asking them the same questions, but people's responses are different. So it really comes down to a jury, how they perceive people. A lot of them are really watching, my client during the whole trial, especially if there's a complaining witness that's up there testifying. They're just watching body language and demeanor. And truly, a lot of it does come down to cross-examination. How do they handle themselves? Does it seem like their story kind of changes and things of that nature? So.
And what's interesting about that is that there's this, part where you're the show, right? You're the one having to talk and defend the client. But then when they do on the stand, you have to play coach. Mm-hmm. You have to help almost explain to them how should they approach these kind of situations. What advice do you have to people who are having in that situation? Hopefully no one has to, but if they are, how should they approach the testifying?
Yes, if your client's going to be testifying, and let's say you are the client, I think a lot of intensive prep work is needed. I find just personally, being a defense attorney, if you are putting your client on the stand, to almost make it seem like you're cross-examining your client and you embrace all the bad facts. We kind of call it taking the sting out, because you want to build kind of a trustworthy relationship with the jury. You don't want them to think you're hiding anything, because I think naturally they kind of think us defense attorneys are coming in hiding things or trying to, get our client off, is a common thing you'll hear jurors say, that they think why we're there. But yeah, I think you just kind of need to be aggressive and have an approach with that, almost kind of leave the state with really not too much left to cross them about. So, yeah.
So let me ask you, how much of what people notice in the legal world comes from Law and Order and these TV shows or these crime shows? Have you noticed that people might be thinking they're more guilty more often because the shows always end up in the characters guilty? Like, do you think that has any influence? Because I feel like everybody's watching them now.
Yes, I think there is not really a clear understanding as to how your case ends up in court. And that's thanks to shows, thanks to TikTok, ChatGPT, everyone kind of trying to look it up. And again, every court, every county is going to be completely different. I think probably one of the most common misconceptions I have is a client will have their case filed and they think their first court date is a trial date. And it's not the case. We have multiple settings, and you'll know well before you even have any kind of contested hearing. So
what's interesting about what you do compared to, let's say the traditional business owner, is that the business owner is always putting their best face forward, is always almost in the happy moments with people. If you're a restaurant owner, you're getting everybody desserts. If you're offering a service, you're a cleaner, you're making the place better, everyone's excited about it. You're in a very unique position to where you connect with people on their toughest moments in their lives. Sometimes nobody really even knows some of the stuff is going on, and you're the one who has to be in the center of it. I preface that with the idea that how are you seeing the American people right now? Like, are they stressed? How are you seeing your clients? Like, what is the pulse right now that you're seeing in America?
It's very stressful. When you get arrested for an offense, it is a big financial burden before you even step foot into the courtroom, because you get arrested, you have to bond out. If, let's say, you were a DWI and your car got towed, well, then you have to pay to get your car out of impound. If you're dealing with the license suspension, then you're having to get an occupational license. Or kind of the same with the assault cases, because you have to work those pretty quickly. You may have bond conditions in place that don't let you go back home or be around your children or family. And I've had clients come to me that are sleeping in their car out in the parking lot, or, have gone through their savings trying to live in a hotel during this period of time. And, in America right now in general, we're all struggling in this economy. And so I'm seeing people come to us and talk with us, but maybe just not in a position to get an attorney at the moment. And sometimes they do take the approach of, maybe I can do this myself, or maybe I'll just wait until things actually start getting moving, which I generally try to encourage them not to do that, because I've had quite a few people that come back to my office and are telling me, hey, I know we met and you quoted me and I didn't retain, but my case filed and I didn't know about it and I missed a court date and now I have a warrant. So it's kind of how it can snowball into something more serious. Yeah.
Wow. So let me ask you this: as they're going through the process and they're doing it on their own, what are you seeing? Something's happening. They're missing the court date, or they're going to court. They're talking to a judge. What's the snap? Oh man, I need to call her back, or I need to get an attorney. Right? What do you think that they're realizing that makes them want to do that?
So one, if they mess up and realize they have a warrant because they don't want to show up to court and deal with that. Another thing is if you do show up by yourself and are trying to tell a judge, I'm going to represent myself, they'll go through, dangers and disadvantages with them. And I think sometimes that can also kind of scare them. Or they meet with that prosecutor and they get told an offer and they don't understand what the offer means. Or maybe it's a little bit more serious than they thought it was going to. And
if you get an offer from the prosecutor, do you have to make a decision right then and there?
No, generally the offer stays open. Now, they do have a right to pull it at any time. So you see that probably in your more serious felony cases. Let's talk about crimes against children, our very serious sexual assault crimes. There'll be offers on the table. And then if you set it for trial and we get to pre-trial and your client still isn't wanting to take it, then a lot of times they may pull it. So,
Wow.
but in terms of misdemeanors, normally offers kind of stay on the table until, a pre-trial setting if you've set it for trial.
What's and we'll have just a couple more questions here. What's a couple of things that you're seeing coming down? I mean, you're working in the courts all the time. With cases. You kind of have your hand on the pulse here.
Mm-hmm.
What are you seeing that's becoming like more common in law that maybe normal citizens aren't aware of, but they're getting in trouble for it?
Mm-hmm. So, one is, going to the store and buying things that they think that they can legally have and not. Another thing, and this has been kind of, I would say, pretty steadily common since I've been practicing. But one thing that's kind of sad to see is, there's a dispute that goes on in a household and people call police thinking they'll come out here and they will just kind of calm everyone down. And maybe something did get physical between the two. But by the time police get there, we're calm. We're just kind of panicked. But someone's going to go to jail, and they'll take whoever is the primary aggressor, and then you have this arrest following you around.
That's interesting. So let's talk. Let's kind of dive into that a little bit. So you're saying that you're arguing with your wife. You guys call the police, because I mean, back in the 90s, they would argue. Parents would get in an argument, and they'd call the police, and the police almost serve like a mediator or someone like in the middle and say, "Hey, let's kind of talk this out," right? But now you're saying if that happens, someone's going to jail.
Correct. Now, when it's verbal, most of the time they can calm them down. But if it gets verbal to a point, let's say you and I are in a dating relationship, and let's say we've been drinking, or I've been drinking, and I said, I just want to kill you and I'm going to put a bullet through your head. Those words in of itself trigger the element or meet the elements of what's called terroristic threat of household family member, a charge that sounds really horrible just for verbal words that came out while I was intoxicated, but leads to myself being arrested if police were to be called.
Wow. So you really have to watch. And now, how does that work? Does it just take one witness to say that this was said, or does there have to be some kind of video or something, or how does that work?
Witness. So, let's
Just
say you,
one?
let's say you called.
So the other person on the other side just says, "Hey, look, this person said this," and that's enough.
Yeah. In fact, most of the time when it comes to assault, more so, again, kind of going back to crimes against children, it really is he said, she said, and you're defending against statements, are very serious crimes against children. A lot of time there is not, DNA evidence, any kind of physical evidence. It's an outcry that's happening later on. Yeah.
Wow. That's incredible. So because a lot of times, again, these shows almost like give you this idea of how it's supposed to be. And it's typically there's a video that shows this, or there's some kind of physical dance, something that says, oh, okay, this person's in trouble. But what you're saying, it's kind of evolved almost to where they're kind of going with the victim's side on it. If the victim says it, then they're just going to count it. And there's almost like no second guessing anymore. Would you say that?
Pretty much, yes. So, and again, and then if there's injuries involved, then without a doubt, someone's going. So, yeah.
Got you. Well, I'm going to end on this question. You've had a chance to work with, again, Americans when they're dealing with their hardest times. What's one advice? They get pulled over, they've been drinking a little bit. What's one advice that you would tell them? How should they handle that getting pulled over? What do you recommend that they do? Yes. Again, be respectful, identify yourself. I would not be admitting to drinking at all, even if they're telling you, I smell it on you though. Are you sure? And your eyes look a little bit red. You kind of have some slurred speech, I wouldn't be admitting to it, because when they do a blood draw later on, let's say it's like 3 hours on down the road, when it comes to trial, they have to prove what you were at the time of driving. And so if they don't have any of these facts from you to try to do what they call extrapolation, then they're not going to be able to pinpoint what you were at the time of driving. And then when it comes to the sobriety test, those are really subjective. So, different officers may see different clues. And so, Do you recommend that they do the sobriety test, or should they not do it? It depends, a typical lawyer answer. I generally tell people not to, but if without a doubt you are sober and you could pass them, then do them. But if not, if you've been drinking and your balance has been off, I wouldn't try to attempt them at all. They kind of are really set up for failure. For instance, one of the tests, the walk and turn test, there are 8 clues they look for and a minimum decision point of 2 clues that an officer needs to see.
But when you list it out, and I've put it on easel paper before a jury before, how many times you can show a clue, it's over 70 different times. So you're kind of telling someone, hey, if you scored a 98% on this test, you failed. And that really is frustrating for people.
Wow. So that's interesting. So just a reminder, people, the sobriety test is not for you, like for your benefit and to help you prove that you're not drunk. It's actually the opposite. Mm-hmm. It's made specifically to show that you have signs of drinking. Mm-hmm. That's incredible. I want to end on this. As you're going on in your career, what is the next goal? Like right now, you're a defense attorney. Are you wanting to do, like, you're going to be a defense attorney for 30 years, or you want to own your practice? What does your future look like?
So I do enjoy being a defense attorney. I think the only other thing I could see myself doing is, while remaining practicing, wanting to be a professor or maybe a clinical professor, because I think when I look back at my entire time being in school, even elementary school, the most impactful teachers and educators I've had have been in law school, more specifically the clinic practice. So I got to start my last year in law school doing criminal defense work already. I had a student bar card. And so I think that has been the most impactful experience I've had. So. Okay.
I want to do one more question because I want to lead up on that. So what are you seeing the future of the legal world look like for these young attorneys? Mm-hmm. Now that you have things like ChatGPT, like mm-hmm. AI, and there's even some more legal products that are becoming more streamlined. Mm-hmm. What do you see in the future of the legal world for these future attorneys?
So I definitely see us still needing to work as hard as we were, because AI, there are a lot of different AI programs, some even tied to our research databases we use, but you still have to work diligently because they aren't always accurate. And so I don't think a future attorney, let's say there's someone in law school right now graduating in 3 years, needs to 4 years from now be just solely relying on, AI to draft their motions or do their research. I think you still need to be working as diligently as we kind of always have had to be. So.
Well, that's awesome. Well, hey, thank you so much for being on here. And as you can see, guys, the future is still bright, especially even if you're in the legal world and AI is coming. Everyone says AI is going to take over. It's not necessarily true. I think it's going to amplify what we're doing. I think you hit on something very important, which was you're still going to end up working hard. I think you actually have to work harder now.
Exactly.
Because I feel like it's allowing you to accomplish more. So you feel like you could do so much more. But I'm excited. Hopefully you can end up becoming a professor of something and you're helping teach these people, because I feel like the next generation of lawyers is going to really define a lot of the freedoms for America, because a lot of these things are having the conversations right now. What does it mean to be a citizen? What does it mean to have the right of search of not being searched, or even being the rights of silence, or First Amendment? All these things are huge, and I think they come first in the defense world. And I think that if you end up becoming a professor, whatever you teach them then is really what's going to define our freedom. So again, I want to thank you for being on here, guys. This has been the X Chamber. Thank you again for being on here.
No, thank you for talking with me.